Marcus didn't plan to fall. One moment, he was carefully stepping across the rocky surface of planet Thylos 9. The next, the ground gave way beneath his feet. Dust and rock swallowed him as he tumbled into darkness, crashing down through layers of loose soil and hidden roots. He landed hard on his back, gasping as pain shot through his shoulder. His helmet light flickered, then came back on, casting a shaky glow around the cavern he had fallen into. Everything was quiet now, too quiet. "Hello," he called out, though he knew no one would hear him. His comms had already lost signal before the fall. He looked up. The hole he had fallen through was far above, a tiny circle of light in a world of darkness. Marcus groaned and sat up, brushing dust from his suit. His backpack had stayed with him, thankfully, though his small drone was smashed. He tapped his wristpad, but there was no signal. He was alone, deep underground. The cavern around him was strange, far too smooth and shaped to be natural. Stone walls curved like they had been carved with care. Strange symbols were etched into them, glowing faintly with blue lines. The air was cool but breathable. "This place, it's not just a cave," Marcus whispered to himself. As he moved forward, careful of his step, he noticed claw marks across the stone floor. Some were fresh, some were deep. He kept walking slowly, flashlight shaking in his hand. Then he saw the bones, piles of them, scattered near a dark wall. Some small, others large. Alien. He couldn't tell if they were old or recent. He swallowed hard and kept moving, heart pounding in his chest. Suddenly, a sound echoed from behind him. Crunch. Marcus spun around. His light revealed nothing, only darkness beyond its reach. Another sound followed, this time to his left. A deep growl, soft but low, like something massive breathing in the shadows. He backed away slowly. But then the floor trembled slightly, as if something heavy was walking toward him. His flashlight flickered again. He smacked it, and it came back, just in time to catch movement ahead. Eyes. Not one pair, but two. Yellow, glowing softly. They stared straight at him from the dark. A shape began to emerge, tall, wide-shouldered, walking on two legs, covered in short fur with curved horns and powerful arms. Marcus froze. Every instinct told him to run, but he couldn't move. His legs felt like stone. The creature growled again, but not like an angry beast. It was a warning, or a greeting. Then, to Marcus's shock, it stepped forward and held out a large hand. Its claws were visible but not raised. It looked at him with deep curiosity. And then, it spoke. "Mine." The voice was rough, deep, and strange, but the word was clear. Marcus blinked. "Wait, what?" The Beastwoman tilted her head, then stepped closer. She sniffed the air around him. Her body was massive, but moved with surprising grace. She wore scraps of armor and fabric made from hide and bone, hanging loosely across her form. Marcus stumbled back and hit the cavern wall. But instead of attacking, the Beastwoman turned her head sharply, just as a loud cracking sound echoed from above. A chunk of stone broke loose from the ceiling and came crashing down. Before Marcus could react, she leaped forward and pulled him away. The rock smashed the spot he had been standing on just a second ago. He lay on the ground, stunned, heart racing. She stood over him, arms spread protectively, growling at the ceiling as more dust rained down. When it stopped, she looked down at him again. "Safe," she said simply. Then she gently picked him up, like he weighed nothing, and began walking deeper into the cave. Marcus was too shocked to fight it. He couldn't believe what just happened. A giant alien woman had saved his life, and claimed him as her own. His thoughts spun wildly as the strange tunnel closed behind them, swallowing them both into the glowing darkness. Marcus's mind was still racing as the Beastwoman carried him through the winding tunnels. She moved with purpose, her steps echoing in the narrow passageways. Despite her size, she seemed to know where she was going. Her eyes glowed softly in the dark, lighting the path ahead. The weight of his situation finally began to settle in. What in the world was happening? He had fallen into an unknown cave, and now found himself in the company of an alien beastwoman who seemed to think he was, what? Her chosen one. Her mate. Mine. She had said earlier, her voice thick with meaning. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact in her mind. Marcus's heart raced as he tried to piece together what he knew. She wasn't just any alien. She was massive, easily twice his size, with sleek, muscular arms and fur that covered her body like armor. But what truly unsettled him were her eyes. Deep, golden, and intelligent. There was nothing wild or animalistic about her gaze. She looked at him like she understood far more than she was letting on. She stopped in front of a cavern wall. The stone here was smooth and had been carefully carved. Strange symbols covered it, glowing faintly, like the markings of some forgotten civilization. The beastwoman lowered Marcus gently to the ground. He stood up quickly, dusting himself off, his legs still shaky from the fall and the shock of everything happening so fast. "Where are we?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to sound confident. "What is this place?" The beastwoman, Calera, as he would soon learn, stared at him for a long moment, almost like she was deciding how much to share. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Home. Home." Marcus repeated, This is your home." Calera nodded, pointing to the symbols on the wall. "Ancient home," she explained. "My people lived here long ago. We are the last." Her voice dropped as if the last part carried great weight. Marcus took a step forward, his curiosity rising despite the tension. "Are you the only one left?" Calera shook her head, her eyes briefly darkening. "No, others are gone. Taken." "Taken by who?" Marcus asked, his mind racing with the possibilities. Could there be others down here? More like her. The beastwoman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached down and touched one of the symbols, tracing it with a clawed finger. "They came, hunting. Not for food, for profit." Marcus's heart sank as he pieced together the horrible truth. Her people had been hunted, captured, and sold. That was why Calera was alone. That was why she had fought so fiercely to protect herself. "You survived by hiding," Marcus said softly, understanding now. "You were the last." Calera looked back at him, her eyes glowing brighter in the dark. There was a deep sadness there, but also something else, something fierce. "I fight," she said simply. "I protect." Marcus was about to respond when a strange noise interrupted them. A low, rumbling sound echoed from the depths of the cavern. A distant growl, like something massive was waking up. Calera's stance immediately shifted, her muscles tensing. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows. She turned back to Marcus and gave him a serious look. "You stay. Safe," she commanded. Before he could protest, she grabbed his arm and led him deeper into the cavern. The air felt heavier now, thick with an unspoken tension. The walls here were lined with more glowing symbols, but they were different from the ones near the entrance. These seemed older, as if they had been untouched for centuries. Calera stopped in front of a large stone door, hidden in the wall. The door had intricate carvings, and strange mechanisms could be seen along the edges. "Stay here," Calera said again, her voice more urgent now. "I go check." Marcus watched as she pushed open the stone door with surprising ease. He felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He didn't want to be left alone, especially not in a place like this. He wanted to ask more questions, to understand what was happening. But before he could follow, Calera disappeared into the darkness. He hesitated for a moment, then decided he couldn't just sit around. His legs carried him to the door, and he stepped inside quietly, trying not to make a sound. The room beyond the door was massive. It was filled with relics, old, worn weapons, ancient tools, and strange artifacts. Everything looked like it had been made for someone much larger than him. Some of the items seemed familiar, like they belonged to a warrior's home. But other pieces, more delicate and intricate, seemed to belong to a civilization that was long gone. At the far end of the room, Kalira was crouched low, peering through a crack in the stone. Her sharp eyes narrowed as she stared out at whatever was beyond. "What is it?" Marcus whispered, stepping closer. Kalira didn't answer immediately. She just kept watching, her gaze focused on the shadows outside. "Enemies," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "Not gone. Still hunt." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. There were more of them, more enemies, and they were still hunting. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. The last thing he expected after falling into a strange cavern was to be caught in a fight for survival, especially not with an alien Beastwoman who thought he was her chosen one. And yet here he was, standing in the heart of her home, hidden deep beneath the surface of an alien world. Kalira, her name, had saved him. And now, she was telling him that their enemies, those who had hunted her kind, were still out there, waiting. "Enemies," Marcus repeated, his voice trembling slightly. He tried to process the information. "Who are they? What do they want?" Kalira did not immediately answer. Instead, she stood up from the crack in the wall, her eyes still narrowed in the direction of the distant sound. The growl from earlier had died down, but there was no peace in the air. It was as if the caverns themselves were holding their breath. "They are the hunters," Kalira finally said, her voice low and filled with a deep, simmering anger. "They come for us. We were once many, but they took us, one by one. Sold us. For profit." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. The cruelty in her words was clear. Her people, Kalira's people, had been treated as nothing more than trophies to be captured and traded. He wanted to ask more, but Kalira had already moved toward the center of the room, where a pile of weapons lay. She picked up a large, jagged blade, a relic from her people, ancient and worn, but still sharp. Marcus watched her carefully, his mind spinning. He had been thinking about escape, about finding a way out of the caves. But now, with the mention of hunters still tracking Kalira, he realized he wasn't just dealing with a strange alien world. He was dealing with something far more dangerous. "Are you going to fight them?" Marcus asked, stepping closer. Kalira glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. "I protect. I fight." Marcus wanted to protest, to say something that might stop her from rushing into danger, but there was something in her eyes, a fierce determination that he couldn't ignore. It was clear that she would do whatever it took to protect herself, and whatever strange bond she had with him, Marcus knew he couldn't leave her to face this alone. For the first time since falling into this cave, he felt a sense of responsibility, not just for his own survival, but for hers as well. As if sensing his thoughts, Kalira gave him a nod. "You stay. Safe," she commanded. Marcus felt a rush of frustration. He didn't want to stay behind. He didn't want to hide. But before he could argue, Kalira had already moved toward the entrance to the cavern, her powerful form disappearing into the shadows. He stood there for a long moment, his mind racing. He couldn't stay here, in this strange place, doing nothing. He had to do something to help her. He had to prove that he wasn't just some helpless human waiting to be saved. Marcus glanced around the room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, ancient markings that seemed to tell stories of long-forgotten battles and heroic victories. The artifacts scattered across the floor were like pieces of a puzzle, each one representing a part of Kalira's past, her people's past. He moved toward the pile of weapons and tools that lay on a nearby stone table. Among them, he found a small, curved dagger, a weapon designed for someone much larger than him, but perhaps it could be useful. As he examined it, he couldn't help but wonder if Kalira's people had used these weapons to defend themselves, or if they had been the tools of their downfall. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching. Kalira had returned. She stood in the doorway, her powerful form silhouetted by the glow of the cavern's strange lights. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she walked over to where Marcus was standing, her eyes scanning him carefully. "Your people, they fight differently," Kalira said, her voice soft but serious. "You have courage, but you must be careful. The hunters do not fight like you." Marcus held up the dagger, unsure of how to respond. "I know, but I'm not just going to sit here and wait." Kalira's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time since they met, Marcus saw a flicker of something other than the warrior in her, something vulnerable, something real. "You are mine," she said softly, as if it was a secret she had been holding back. Marcus's heart skipped a beat at her words. She said it so casually, so naturally, as though it was an undeniable truth. And despite everything, despite the confusion and danger and his need to find a way out, he realized something. He couldn't deny it either. He didn't understand what was happening, but somewhere in the depths of his being, he knew that whatever bond they shared, however strange it was undeniable. "I'm not your prisoner," he said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. Kalira tilted her head, as if considering his words. Then she stepped closer, and for a brief moment, her gaze softened. "You are not my prisoner," she said quietly. "You are mine, and I am yours." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. What did that even mean? Before he could say anything more, a distant sound, a noise from outside, cut through the air. The growl from earlier had returned, this time louder, closer. The hunters were near. Kalira's expression hardened again, and her body went tense. "They are here." Marcus swallowed hard, his grip tightening around the dagger. The time for questions was over. They had to survive. The ground beneath Marcus's feet vibrated slightly as the growl from outside the cavern grew louder. The hunters were getting closer. He could hear their voices now, low and murmuring, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. They were coming for Kalira. They were coming for her. And she wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. Marcus could see that now. There was no fear in her eyes, just a burning resolve. "Kalira, we have to go," Marcus said, his voice tight with urgency. He didn't want to argue with her, didn't want to seem like he was telling her what to do, but the situation was growing more dangerous by the second. The hunters weren't far off now. He could hear the sharp sound of metal scraping stone, the unmistakable noise of weapons being drawn. But Kalira simply shook her head, her golden eyes flashing with defiance. "No, I will not run." Marcus's chest tightened as he looked at her, her words echoing in his mind. "I will not run." Those words meant more than just a refusal to flee. They meant she had nothing left to lose. She had been hiding for so long, surviving alone in the dark, and now that someone, Marcus, was here with her, she wasn't going to let anyone take him away. Not now. She moved quickly, silently, as if the very air around her had become part of her weapon. Her claws flexed and relaxed as she walked, her eyes scanning the dark tunnels that stretched before them. Marcus stayed close behind her, his heart racing. He wasn't a fighter like Kalira. He didn't have the strength or the skills she did, but he had something else. He had his mind, and he would use it. "Tell me everything you know about them," Marcus said as they moved through the tunnels. "Who are they? What do they want with you?" Kalira glanced back at him briefly, her eyes flickering with something like sadness. "They are not like us," she said. "They are hunters, but not for food, not for survival. They hunt for profit." Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. Profit? The hunters weren't interested in killing them for food or resources. They were doing it for gain. They treated her people like objects, like something to be sold, bought, and traded. "They capture us," Kalira continued, her voice low and full of anger. "Sell us to the highest bidder. Others have come before, and many have not returned. Those who do are broken. Their spirits are lost." Marcus's stomach turned at her words. The thought of someone hunting for sport, for profit, was one thing, but the idea of selling beings like Kalira's people as if they were cattle, that was something else entirely. Something cruel and unforgivable. But why haven't they captured you? Marcus asked. You're strong. You could fight. Kalira paused for a moment, her eyes flicking toward the shadows ahead. They tried, she said, her voice thick with bitterness. I was one of the last to escape. They thought I was weak because I was alone. They didn't understand. Marcus's mind raced. He could see it now. The poachers who hunted Kalira and her people were relentless. They didn't care about anything except profit. It wasn't about survival or honor. It was about control. Kalira, Marcus said, stepping in front of her, we can't keep running like this. If they catch us, I will not let them take you, she interrupted fiercely. You are mine. I will protect you. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The force of her words was like a weight pressing down on him. He wasn't sure what he felt in that moment, fear, confusion, or something else entirely. But he couldn't deny the strength in her voice. She wasn't just talking about a physical bond. She was talking about something deeper, something that had been building since the moment they met. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, the air grew colder. The walls became smoother, almost metallic. The glow from the bioluminescent plants that dotted the cavern's walls faded, leaving them in near-complete darkness. And then Marcus heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy, purposeful. They were here. Kalira stopped in her tracks, her body going rigid. She held her breath, listening. Marcus did the same, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He could feel the presence of the hunters now, their energy crackling through the air. They were close. A low voice echoed through the tunnels. She's close. Find her. The voice was raspy and sharp, filled with authority. Marcus clenched his fists, fighting the urge to turn and run. He had no weapons, nothing but his wits, and that wasn't enough to fight off whatever hunters Kalira had been hiding from. Stay close, Kalira whispered. She didn't need to say more. Marcus could feel the tension in her body, her muscles coiled and ready to spring. Without another word, she darted forward, moving with the speed of a predator. Marcus followed, his heart hammering in his chest. The hunters were getting closer, but Kalira had the advantage. She knew the tunnels, the shadows, the silent ways to slip past them undetected. They reached a narrow passageway, a crack in the rock that only Kalira could fit through. She paused for a moment, then turned to Marcus. You must go. Hide, she said urgently. They will not find you if you are quiet. Stay hidden. Marcus hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't want to leave her behind, but he knew she was right. He had no choice. He nodded, then squeezed into the narrow gap, pressing himself into the cold stone. Kalira's eyes softened for a moment before she turned, vanishing into the shadows. Marcus held his breath. The sound of footsteps grew louder. The footsteps of the hunters grew louder, and Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He pressed himself deeper into the narrow crack in the stone, trying to make himself as small as possible. The cold stone scraped against his back as he held his breath, praying that they wouldn't find him. The air was thick with tension, and the low murmur of the hunters' voices seemed to vibrate through the walls. There's no sign of her here, one of the hunters muttered. She must have gone deeper. Marcus stiffened. He had to stay silent. Every instinct told him to run, to find a way out, but he couldn't leave Kalira. Not like this. He had no idea what these hunters would do to her, but whatever it was, he couldn't allow it. She had saved him. Now it was his turn to help her, even if it meant facing whatever was out there. He listened carefully, trying to piece together what he could hear. The hunters were moving closer, and he could sense the heavy air that came with their presence. They were different from Kalira, far less graceful, and more brutal in the way they moved. The voice of the lead hunter snapped Marcus out of his thoughts. Spread out. Search every corner of this place. She can't have gone far. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The walls felt like they were closing in. He couldn't stay hidden forever. He had to do something. His eyes flicked back to the narrow crack in the rock. Calira had vanished through that gap, and Marcus could hear her moving silently in the shadows beyond. She was always a step ahead of them. She had the advantage. But he didn't. A sharp, quick rustle caught his attention. Through the gap, he saw Calira, her powerful frame silhouetted against the darkness. She was listening intently, her golden eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Her posture was alert, every muscle tensed, ready to spring into action. She wasn't going to wait for the hunters to find her. Calira, Marcus whispered to himself, unsure if she could hear him. He wanted to warn her, to tell her to be careful, but there was no time. The hunters were closing in, and if she didn't act soon, they would have her. A sudden sound broke the silence, the unmistakable crack of a footstep on the stone. The hunter nearest to Marcus was much closer now, moving dangerously close to where Calira had been. He couldn't wait any longer. Marcus gritted his teeth and crawled backward, out of the crack, trying to make as little noise as possible. He knew what he had to do. The hunters were now just a few steps away, unaware that he was behind them. Marcus quickly scanned the room. There had to be something he could use, anything to give Calira a chance to escape. His eyes landed on a broken piece of metal. It was an old weapon, jagged and sharp. It wasn't much, but it would do. He grabbed it, and with a deep breath, he stepped forward, moving as quietly as possible. He had to draw the hunters' attention away from Calira. He couldn't let them find her. Marcus crept toward the nearest hunter, his heart pounding in his chest. The hunter turned his back for just a moment, and Marcus seized the opportunity. He threw the metal shard into the shadows. The noise was enough to draw the hunter's attention, and with a curse, he turned toward the sound. "Over there," the hunter shouted, raising his weapon. The distraction worked. The hunter's focus shifted, and Marcus darted back into the shadows, making himself as small as possible. He didn't know if Calira had heard him, but he hoped she would take the opportunity to slip away. He was giving her a chance. As the hunters spread out in pursuit of the noise, Marcus's eyes searched desperately for Calira. He had to know she was safe. He couldn't leave without her. He heard a sharp, heavy footstep, then another. The hunters were getting closer to him now. He was trapped. There was nowhere to run, and nowhere to hide. They would find him. There was no escape. But Calira was not far off. She wouldn't let them catch him. She couldn't. Without thinking, Marcus stood up and dashed across the cavern, moving swiftly through the darkness. He had no plan, no strategy, just the hope that Calira would act fast enough. He needed her. She had saved him once, and now it was his turn to save her. His footfalls echoed in the cavern as he sprinted past the hunters. The sound of his footsteps immediately drew their attention. There he is," one of the hunters yelled. Marcus's heart leaped into his throat as he ran, pushing himself faster, harder. He could hear the hunters behind him, their footsteps pounding the ground in pursuit. They were closing in. Suddenly, a loud, terrifying growl filled the cavern, followed by a series of quick, sharp movements. Marcus's breath caught in his chest as Calira appeared from the shadows, her claws flashing in the dim light. She lunged at the nearest hunter, her strength and speed overwhelming him in an instant. Calira's roar echoed through the cavern as she fought back with everything she had. The hunters tried to fight back, but they were no match for her. She was a force of nature, a deadly predator, and no one could stop her when she was protecting what was hers. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, watching in awe as Calira fought with raw power. He had never seen anything like it. She was unstoppable. He quickly grabbed a nearby weapon, joining her in the fight. Together, they were a force the hunters couldn't reckon with. The air in the cavern was thick with tension as Calira fought with a ferocity that Marcus had never seen before. Her claws slashed through the air, tearing into the hunters with swift precision. They tried to fight back, but their weapons were no match for her raw strength. The lead hunter stumbled backward, his face twisted in disbelief, as Calira disarmed him in a single movement. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, watching as Calira dispatched the hunters one by one. She was like a force of nature, a wild storm in the form of a warrior. Her every move was calculated, but also wild, her power unmatched. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he watched her protect him, her focus unwavering, her instincts sharp. The hunters didn't stand a chance, but Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. The lead hunter, though stunned, had called for reinforcements before Calira had overpowered him. They had to finish this quickly before more arrived. He gripped the jagged weapon in his hand and turned toward the remaining hunters, who were regrouping in the shadows. He had never been a fighter. His training, such as it was, had been more about survival and exploration than combat. But something about this moment, about being here with Calira, stirred something deep within him. He couldn't just stand there. He had to help. He had to fight alongside her, no matter how out of place he felt. He charged forward, slamming into one of the hunters from behind. The hunter was caught off guard, and Marcus managed to knock him off balance, sending him sprawling to the ground. Before the hunter could recover, Calira was upon him, her claws flashing, finishing him off with a swift motion. Marcus breathed heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The sense of danger was real, but there was something else too, something powerful in standing beside Calira, something that made him feel more alive than he ever had before. The last remaining hunter turned and bolted, realizing he was outmatched. He ran toward the exit, desperation in his steps. "No," Marcus shouted. "We can't let him escape." Calira's eyes locked on the fleeing hunter, her body tense. Without a word, she took off after him, her powerful legs moving like lightning. Marcus hesitated for only a moment before following her. He wasn't going to let her fight this alone. Not again. The hunter stumbled as he reached the narrow passageway leading out of the cavern. His breathing was heavy, his steps frantic. But Calira was right behind him, her growl echoing off the walls. With one final burst of speed, Calira leaped forward and grabbed the hunter by the collar, lifting him off the ground with ease. He struggled, his eyes wide with fear, but it was no use. Calira's grip was like iron. Marcus caught up to them, panting, his chest heaving with the effort. He watched as Calira held the hunter in the air, her golden eyes glowing with a mix of fury and something else, something more protective, almost maternal. The hunter's voice trembled as he begged, "Please, don't kill me. I'll tell you everything. I'll leave. Just let me go." Calira's gaze softened for a moment, but her grip didn't loosen. She looked at Marcus, her eyes silently asking him what they should do. Marcus knew that they had to make a choice. This man had been part of a group that had caused Calira so much pain, so much suffering. They had hunted her people, enslaved them, and turned them into nothing more than merchandise. He could feel the weight of her eyes on him, waiting for his decision. It wasn't easy. Part of him wanted to let the hunter go, to give him a chance to turn his life around. But the other part of him, the part that had seen Calira's pain, the part that had felt the anger in her voice, knew that justice needed to be served. She had suffered for so long, and now it was time to make sure that no one else would come after them. "End it," Marcus said, his voice firm. Calira didn't hesitate. With a single motion, she tossed the hunter aside. He hit the ground hard, and his body lay still. Marcus's stomach churned at the sight. He had made the choice, but it still felt heavy. He could feel the weight of it in the pit of his stomach, but he knew it was the right decision. They couldn't let anyone else get away with hunting them down, not after everything Calira had been through. Calira turned to him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, slowly, she stepped closer. Her eyes softened as she looked at him. The fight was over, but the silence between them felt heavy. "I am yours," she said quietly, her voice filled with a strange, tender warmth. "And you are mine." Marcus felt a rush of emotions he couldn't quite explain. He wasn't sure what this bond was, or why it felt so powerful, but in that moment, he realized something important. He wasn't just her protector anymore. They were in this together. Kalira reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of their shared strength. They had survived this battle together, and they would face whatever came next side by side. For the first time since he had fallen into this alien world, Marcus felt like he had found a place where he belonged. He didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was clear. He and Kalira were connected now, more than he ever could have imagined. The caverns fell silent, the only sound the soft echo of their breaths in the cool, still air. The hunters were gone, defeated by Kalira's strength and Marcus's determination. But the quiet left behind was heavy, thick with the weight of everything that had just happened. Marcus stood beside Kalira, his mind spinning with the rush of the battle. The moment had passed, but the consequences of it all still hung in the air. He glanced at her, still trying to wrap his head around everything. She had fought so fiercely to protect him, and now he felt as though he owed her more than he could ever repay. Kalira, too, was silent, her sharp eyes watching the shadows, ever alert. Her body was still tense from the fight, but there was a quiet pride in her movements now. She had stood her ground. She had fought not just for herself, but for both of them. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice low, as if afraid to break the fragile peace. Kalira turned to face him, her golden eyes locking with his. For a moment, she said nothing, studying him. Then, with a soft breath, she nodded. "I am strong." Marcus nodded, but there was something in his chest, something he couldn't explain. The bond between them, the strange connection that had grown stronger since their first meeting, felt real now. It was as if they were two pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their place. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Kalira was no longer just a protector. She was more than that. She had become someone he cared for, someone who had made him feel things he never expected. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure where this path would take him. "We're not done yet," Kalira said suddenly, breaking the silence. Marcus blinked, pulling his mind back to the present. "What do you mean?" "The hunters may be gone, but there is more. They are not the only ones who hunt." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "There are more like them." Kalira stepped closer to him, her voice quiet but firm. "There are others. The ones who sent them. They will come. They will not stop until they have what they want." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had known this wouldn't be the end, but hearing it from her, hearing the certainty in her voice, made it real. The hunters weren't just a group of poachers. They were part of something larger, something more dangerous. "So what do we do now?" Marcus asked. "We can't stay here. We need to leave." Kalira shook her head. "No, we must not run. Not anymore. We fight." Marcus felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "Fight," he repeated, his voice uncertain. "Yes." Kalira's eyes softened for a moment, her gaze filled with a strange sadness. "They took my people. They hunted us like animals, and I will not let them take anyone else. Not again." Her words were filled with the weight of her history, the pain of loss that she had carried for so long. Marcus could see it now, in the way she spoke, in the strength of her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for something greater. She was fighting for justice. Marcus didn't know if he was ready for this, but he also knew he couldn't turn his back on her. He had seen her strength, her courage. She had shown him what it meant to stand tall, to fight back. And now he had to do the same. He looked at Kalira, his voice steady. "I'll fight with you." A flicker of something, maybe relief, passed through her eyes. She nodded once, then turned toward the entrance of the cavern, her body poised for whatever was to come next. "We will need allies," she said, her voice calm but determined. There are others like us, others who have survived. We will find them. Marcus felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about fighting for their survival anymore. This was about fighting for something bigger. This was about standing together, united by the bond they had forged, and doing whatever it took to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Kalira stepped forward, and Marcus followed. They made their way through the caverns, the passageways now seeming less like dark, oppressive tunnels, and more like a path towards something new, something full of possibilities. He had no idea where this journey would lead, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone. For the first time, he felt like he had a purpose. Together, they moved through the tunnels, Kalira leading the way with her sharp instincts. Marcus stayed close, his mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. The hunters were just the beginning. There was a larger fight ahead, one that would test everything they had. They emerged from the cavern into the open air. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the landscape. It was peaceful, for the moment, but Marcus knew that peace wouldn't last. He didn't know how they would fight, or who they would face. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Kalira face it alone. They walked side by side, the bond between them stronger than ever. They had survived the hunters, but there were still battles ahead. And Marcus was ready. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for Kalira, and for the future they would build together.